There's a moment in television history so familiar, so timeless, that generations of viewers could hum its tune in their sleep. The whistling theme of The Andy Griffith Show has become more than a melody. It's a memory. But behind that easy charm, the slow southern afternoons, and the laughter echoing from Mayberry's streets, lies a treasure trove of secrets most people never noticed. Hidden in plain sight are stories of laughter and heartbreak, friendship and quiet struggles, all woven together into one of the most enduring shows ever made. When we watch that opening scene of Andy and little Opie walking toward the fishing hole, it feels pure and simple. But few know that what looks effortless on camera was the result of careful staging, countless retakes, and one unexpected moment that would become television gold. That stone Opie tosses into the water? It wasn't scripted at all. Ron Howard, just 6 years old at the time, was simply being himself. The rock skipped perfectly, creating a spontaneous bit of magic that the crew instantly knew they had to keep. That natural innocence became the symbol of Mayberry's soul, authentic, unpolished, and profoundly human. But not every moment behind the scenes carried that same gentle simplicity. Andy Griffith himself, though beloved as the calm and good-natured sheriff, was a man of deep intensity and quiet conflict. Away from the camera, he was known for his meticulous standards and emotional depth. His chemistry with Don Knotts, who played the bumbling yet lovable Deputy Barney Fife, was so natural that many assumed the two had known each other for years before the show began. In truth, they'd only met briefly on Broadway, yet quickly developed a bond that mirrored their on-screen friendship, a balance of chaos and calm that defined the show's heartbeat. And that bond wasn't just for the cameras. During filming, Andy and Don were inseparable, sharing jokes, helping shape scenes, and often improvising lines that later became fan favorites. What the audience never saw, though, was the undercurrent of pressure that came with creating perfection every week. Andy carried the weight of the show's reputation, while Don, always doubting his own comedic timing, would often second-guess his performance. Yet somehow, when the cameras rolled, the two found magic in each other's rhythm. Few fans realize that one of the most iconic episodes, the Pickle Story, almost never made it past the rehearsal table. The now famous scene, where Aunt Bee's homemade pickles turn out disastrously bad, had the cast laughing so hard between takes that production nearly fell behind schedule. Frances Bavier, who played Aunt Bee, was reportedly embarrassed by how many times they had to restart. But Andy encouraged her to lean into it, telling her that imperfection was what made Mayberry real. The audience adored the result. To this day, fans still rank it among the funniest episodes in the series. And speaking of Frances Bavier, her story is one of the most quietly fascinating of all. Though she perfectly embodied Aunt Bee's warmth on screen, she was known to be quite reserved, and at times difficult, off-camera. She preferred solitude, often retreating to her dressing room between scenes, avoiding the light-hearted banter that filled the set. Some took it as aloofness. Others understood it as a reflection of her classical acting background. Yet, in the later years of her life, she reportedly expressed regret for not being closer to her castmates. "They were my family," she once admitted, "even if I didn't always show it." Then there was Ron Howard, Opie, the wide-eyed boy whose curiosity mirrored every child watching at home. Many don't realize how naturally talented Ron was, even before the cameras started rolling. He had an instinct for timing and sincerity that made every scene believable. Andy once said that working with Ron was like watching lightning in a bottle. And indeed, some of the show's most touching moments came from unscripted exchanges between Andy and the young actor. In one scene, when Opie expresses guilt over killing a bird with his slingshot, the fatherly warmth in Andy's eyes wasn't acting. It was genuine compassion for the boy he had come to love like a son. But for all the laughter Mayberry gave us, the set wasn't immune to real pain. Don Knotts suffered quietly from severe anxiety and insecurity. Despite his immense talent and comedic genius, he often worried he wasn't good enough. Between takes, he'd sit silently, reviewing his lines, while Andy would stop by to crack a joke or tell a story just to lift his friend's spirits. Their friendship wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. And when Don eventually left the show after 5 seasons, Andy was heartbroken. He later said that without Don, the show lost a little piece of its soul. Even the minor details in the show carried meaning. The courthouse door that swung slightly off its hinges, the faded paint on the cell bars, the old rotary phone, all were chosen deliberately to make Mayberry feel lived in and imperfect. It was that imperfection that audiences related to. They didn't see glamorous stars or shiny sets. They saw themselves, ordinary people in a town where decency still mattered, and every problem could be solved with a conversation on the porch. As the seasons went on, the cast became a family in every sense. Between filming, they'd share meals, play pranks, and even spend holidays together. One of the most memorable pranks involved Andy sneaking into Don's dressing room and swapping his uniform hat for a ridiculously oversized one. Don, playing along, wore it to the next rehearsal without saying a word, causing the entire crew to burst out laughing. It was moments like that, off-camera, unseen by the public, that made Mayberry's warmth so authentic. Yet not every story ended in laughter. When Don Knotts decided to leave to pursue a movie career, he didn't tell Andy right away. He'd assumed Andy planned to end the series after 5 seasons, so Don signed a film contract elsewhere. When Andy chose to continue the show, Don was torn between loyalty and opportunity. The decision strained their friendship for years, though they eventually reconciled. Fans noticed the difference too. The chemistry that defined the show's first years was never quite the same again. By the time the Andy Griffith Show reached its later seasons, television was changing. The world outside Mayberry was growing turbulent civil rights marches. The Vietnam War and shifting American values were redefining what audiences wanted from TV. But Andy insisted on keeping the show untouched by the chaos of the real world. He believed that Mayberry represented what people wished the world could still be: simple, kind, and safe. And maybe that's why it still resonates. Behind every smile, every laugh, and every heartwarming goodbye, there were people trying their best to hold on to that ideal. What made the show truly special wasn't perfection, it was humanity. As the Andy Griffith Show grew in popularity, life in Mayberry seemed to stand still, while the real world outside moved faster than ever. Viewers across America clung to the familiar warmth of Sheriff Taylor's calm voice, Barney's harmless blunders, and Aunt Bee's gentle touch. But behind those smiles, change was creeping in quietly, inevitably, and it left its mark on everyone involved. Andy Griffith, though celebrated for his easygoing screen presence, carried a burden heavier than most realized. He wasn't just the star. He was the heart, the leader, the invisible glue that held the production together. Cast and crew often described him as both a mentor and a perfectionist. He had an instinct for storytelling and would personally rewrite dialogue if he felt it didn't sound true to Mayberry. To Andy, every line mattered. Every glance, every pause, was a reflection of the town's moral simplicity. And though he demanded excellence, he never raised his voice. His quiet authority set the tone for everyone around him. But Andy's personal life during those years was more complex. The pressure of fame, the long filming hours, and his drive for creative control took their toll. Some say he became increasingly introspective, spending hours alone between takes. Still, when the cameras rolled, he turned on that signature warmth as if flipping a switch. It was that professionalism and deep understanding of character that made audiences believe in Mayberry as a real place. For Don Knotts, success was a double-edged sword. His portrayal of Barney Fife had made him a household name, and his comedic timing was unmatched. Yet, the same nervous energy that made Barney so endearing often mirrored Don's real emotions. He struggled with anxiety, constantly fearing that his best work was behind him. To cope, He immersed himself in every detail of his role. Each twitch, stammer, and gesture was carefully honed. Andy once said that watching Don perform was like watching a man walk a tightrope, terrified, but never falling. Their partnership, though sometimes strained by the demands of fame, remained one of deep mutual respect. In interviews years later, Andy admitted that the best scenes were often the ones he didn't control, the ones where Don's wild improvisation pushed him to react naturally. "He made me better," Andy said simply. And in truth, he did. Meanwhile, Frances Bavier, Aunt B, remained a figure of quiet dignity. But what most fans never knew was that her relationship with the cast was far more complicated than the loving motherly figure she portrayed. She came from a background in serious theater, trained in the discipline of Broadway, and she often found the light-hearted atmosphere on set difficult to adjust to. Though polite and professional, she sometimes kept her distance, preferring solitude over laughter. The cast respected her deeply, but often felt a sadness behind her smile. Later in life, Frances reportedly expressed remorse for not letting her guard down more. "They were my family," she said softly in one of her final interviews, "and I wish I had treated them that way sooner." Behind the humor, there were also physical scars. Andy once suffered a hand injury during filming that he chose to hide rather than delay production. He simply adjusted his gestures, using props or camera angles to conceal the swelling. That quiet resilience was typical of him, never showing weakness, always pressing forward for the sake of the story. The audience never noticed, and the episodes carried on as if nothing had happened. One of the show's most overlooked figures was Hal Smith, the actor who played the friendly drunk, Otis Campbell. Many viewers assumed Hal's character was comic relief, but his performance carried a subtle depth that made Otis more than just a caricature. Off-screen, Hal was nothing like his on-screen persona. He was disciplined, polite, and deeply religious. He often joked that he had never tasted alcohol in his life, yet somehow managed to portray one of TV's most believable drunks. Then there was George Lindsay Goober Pyle, the good-natured gas station mechanic who joined later in the series. George faced the impossible task of following in the footsteps of Jim Neighbor's beloved character, Gomer Pyle. It wasn't easy stepping into a world that already felt complete, but Lindsay brought his own brand of charm. While Gomer was innocent and wide-eyed, Goober was quirky and self-assured. Over time, he became an essential part of Mayberry's fabric. Off-camera, George's booming laugh and genuine kindness earned him the affection of his castmates. The Mayberry we saw on screen seemed timeless, but the production world behind it was constantly evolving. By the mid-1960s, television was transitioning from black and white to color, a shift that Andy himself approached with caution. He feared the change would rob the show of its nostalgic simplicity. And in some ways, he was right. Fans often say the early black and white seasons feel more authentic, softer, gentler, more in tune with the town's moral compass. Yet, even as color brightened the screen, the shadows behind the curtain deepened. Don Knotts' departure left a void that couldn't be easily filled. His decision wasn't driven by ego, but by timing. He had assumed the show would end after 5 seasons and signed a contract for several film projects. When CBS decided to renew the series, Don faced an agonizing choice. He loved Andy, loved the show, but he couldn't break his promise. The day he told Andy he was leaving, both men reportedly sat in silence for several minutes. No arguments, no hard words, just mutual sadness. The absence of Barney Fife changed everything. Andy, though too proud to admit it publicly, felt the loss deeply. The dynamic that had powered Mayberry's heartbeat was gone. The later seasons, while still charming, carried a subtle melancholy. The laughter remained, but something beneath it had shifted. And yet, the show pressed on, introducing new characters and storylines to keep the magic alive. Emmett, the Fix-It Man, Howard Sprague, the county clerk, and the charming Helen Crump, Andy's schoolteacher love interest, all became part of the Mayberry tapestry. Helen, played by Annetta Corso, brought a quiet strength to the show. What most viewers didn't know was that Andy and Annetta's on-screen chemistry extended beyond the cameras. Their closeness was real, though discreet. Theirs was a friendship that blurred the line between fiction and life. A quiet companionship that endured even after the series ended. And as the series neared its final years, another emotional thread emerged: the maturation of young Ron Howard. The curious little boy from the fishing scene had grown into a thoughtful young man. The writers began giving him more complex material, allowing him to explore teenage emotions and moral lessons. One particularly moving episode, where Opie struggles with understanding honesty and integrity, remains a fan favorite. Andy, watching Ron's growth both on and off screen, reportedly told friends he saw in the boy the best parts of himself. As the years passed, The Andy Griffith Show wasn't just a sitcom anymore. It was a reflection of an America people longed for, even as it slipped further away. Each episode carried a moral heartbeat, subtle but clear. Kindness over pride, understanding over judgment, and simplicity over ambition. These weren't just lessons for the characters, they were lessons for the nation, and perhaps that's why the final episodes feel so bittersweet. Behind every smile, there's a sense of farewell. The laughter feels a little softer, the goodbyes a little longer. Andy once said that ending the show was like saying goodbye to a friend who never did you wrong. As The Andy Griffith Show approached its final chapter, there was a quiet sense of inevitability hanging over the set. The laughter still echoed. The streets of Mayberry still looked sunlit and serene, but the spirit of the show had changed. The town that once seemed untouched by time was beginning to fade into television memory. Andy himself knew it. He could feel that Mayberry had given everything it had to give, and rather than watch it lose its heart, he chose to let it rest while it was still beloved. The final episode was filmed with a mix of nostalgia and restraint. There were no dramatic farewells, no sweeping goodbyes, just another gentle walk through a world that felt more like home than fiction. The cast knew, even as the cameras stopped rolling, that this wasn't just the end of a show. It was the end of an era. After the curtain closed on Mayberry, the lives of its cast members went in different directions, yet they remained forever tied to the place that made them legends. Andy went on to new projects, including more dramatic roles that revealed his range as an actor. Don Knotts dove into a thriving film career, his comedic brilliance lighting up movies like The Ghost and Mr. Chicken and The Incredible Mr. Limpet. Though he played many characters after Barney Fife, that nervous, lovable deputy always followed him, and he never seemed to mind. "If I'm remembered as Barney," he once said, "then I did something right." Frances Bavier retired to a quiet life in North Carolina, not far from the kind of town Mayberry was modeled after. She lived modestly, surrounded by the same small-town calm she had helped bring to life on television. Though she rarely spoke publicly after her retirement, her neighbors remembered her as kind but private, a woman who, even in her solitude, carried the spirit of Aunt Bee. Ron Howard, on the other hand, would go on to become one of the most respected filmmakers of his generation. Yet, even decades later, he often spoke of his time in Mayberry with gratitude. "I learned everything about storytelling from watching Andy," he said. He didn't just act, he understood rhythm, honesty, and the power of silence. It's poetic that the boy who once cast stones into a pond on screen would grow up to create ripples across Hollywood for generations to come. George Lindsay, Hal Smith, and the other beloved supporting cast members continued to work in television and theater, forever carrying their Mayberry characters with pride. They often appeared at fan conventions, where audiences of all ages would thank them for reminding the world that kindness and humor never go out of style. And they'd smile, still calling each other by their old character names, as if time had stopped somewhere back on that familiar street corner. But perhaps the most profound impact of The Andy Griffith Show was on its audience. The show aired during one of the most turbulent decades in American history, the 1960s, a time of division, protest, and transformation. Yet, in the middle of all that noise, Mayberry offered something simple and pure. A place where problems were solved with understanding instead of anger, where friendship mattered more than fame, and where decency was the quiet hero of every story. Viewers clung to that ideal, not because they believed the world was really like Mayberry, but because they wished it could be. And the beauty of it all is that even though the show ended, Mayberry never truly disappeared. It lived on in reruns, in late-night marathons, and in the hearts of those who grew up whistling that unforgettable tune. Each generation rediscovered it, drawn not by flashy effects or complicated plots, but by the steady comfort of its truth. Still, for all its laughter and warmth, there were aspects of the show that time quietly softened, moments that only careful viewers ever noticed. The way Andy's face would change ever so slightly in emotional scenes, revealing the real man beneath the character. The subtle sadness behind Don Knotts' wild-eyed comedy, a reflection of his own private insecurities. The way Aunt Bee's hands sometimes trembled just slightly, betraying Francis Bavier's quiet nerves. These tiny human moments gave the show a soul that no script could manufacture. One of the most touching stories from behind the scenes came years after the show ended. When Don Knotts' health began to decline late in life, Andy visited him in the hospital. Friends say that when Andy entered the room, Don's eyes lit up. They joked, they laughed, and for a moment, it was as if no time had passed. As Andy stood to leave, Don reached out and said softly, "You know, we really did make something special, didn't we?" Andy smiled and replied, "Yeah, buddy, we sure did." It was a simple exchange, but it said everything. Andy Griffith himself would later reflect that The Andy Griffith Show wasn't really about law enforcement, or even small-town life. It was about people. It was about love, he said, about treating people right, about understanding, and about forgiving. And perhaps that's why the show has endured. It wasn't built on spectacle, it was built on humanity. Even after Andy passed away in 2012, the legacy of Mayberry continued to ripple outward. Fans still travel to his hometown of Mount Airy, North Carolina, the real-life inspiration for Mayberry to walk the streets that mirror the fictional town. They visit the Andy Griffith Museum, stand outside the replica courthouse, and whistle that familiar tune as if calling back the spirit of simpler times. For them, Mayberry isn't just nostalgia. It's a reminder of what goodness looks like when life slows down enough to notice it. If you look closely at that iconic opening scene again, Andy walking beside young Opie down the dirt path, fishing poles in hand, you can almost feel the layers beneath it now. It's not just a father and son heading toward a fishing hole. It's a symbol of innocence, mentorship, and the passing of wisdom from one generation to the next. The moment feels eternal because, in some way, it is. And that's the beautiful paradox of The Andy Griffith Show. It was never about escaping reality, it was about preserving the best parts of it. The humor, the warmth, the gentle lessons hidden inside everyday life. Each episode was a quiet sermon about patience, respect, and forgiveness, wrapped in laughter and small-town charm. So when people say, they don't make shows like that anymore, they're right. But maybe that's because The Andy Griffith Show didn't just belong to its time. It belonged to every time. Mayberry may have been fictional, but its values were real. And though decades have passed since Andy and Opie took that slow walk toward the water, the world still needs what they represented: kindness, humility, and the simple courage to do the right thing. That's why, for many, The Andy Griffith Show will never truly end. It lives wherever people long for decency, wherever someone hums that gentle whistle under their breath, and wherever a story reminds us that sometimes The greatest treasures are hidden in the quiet moments most people never notice.